Hello, and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. 15 years ago today, a particular indie rock band released a debut album that would possibly change the face of the independent rock music scene and probably became one of the most, if not the most highest selling debut album for a British rock band ever. I'm of course talking about Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not by the Arctic Monkeys. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a physical copy of it right now, be it a CD or a vinyl, but I have managed to take a listen to it online and gather up some thoughts upon it, so I'm going to go through each of the songs as I would do. Kickstarting the album is the song The View from the Afternoon, a very fast-paced, very punk-esque kind of track that really does set the mood up with this very semi-rebellious and kind of urban tone. The vocals and songwriting of Alex Turner really does keep up its consistent pace. And I also like to point out he was just turning 20 by the time this album came out, which is quite impressive for someone of that age. The song has a kind of false climax about 2.25 minutes in, and it starts all over again in a kind of fun, resolutive ending. The next track is I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor, the first single of the album and of the band, and it's a good first impression of it. Definitely shows off their garage style and the typical quick drum pacing that's very associated with the band and its style. The riffs from Alec Turner and Jamie Cook, as well as a very brief reference to Duran Duran's Rio, does give it that kind of nostalgic feel that does feel reminiscent of the mid-2000s and before. Next is Fake Tales of San Francisco, a slightly more calmer, more funkish kind of pub rock kind of track. Its lyrics are actually kind of self-aware. It goes into how a lot of bands try to be like the more popular bands, as with the lyric, get off the bandwagon and put down the handbook. It's a song that I think many people can relate to, especially people who are trying to start up their own kind of indie bands or kind of start off a musical career of any kind, really. Dancing Shoes is another really fun song. A great galumping bass line and that kind of epic riff that sounds like that's very reminiscent of like the early 80s era of Motorhead. And then there's the song You Probably Couldn't See for the Lights, where you were staring straight at me. Boy, is that a mouthful. That title does sound like something out of the verse of the song, yet this doesn't appear anywhere in the song. But what it does make up for is another good fast-paced and fun, energetic track. Is another good one on the album that I recommend listening to. Still Take You Home is the only one in the album that has the sharing credits of both Turner and Cook, and it really shows. It's very grungy riff, very reminiscent of REM and Nirvana, and almost semi-plucky guitars does give it that more almost chill out, but still reminiscent of those kind of other songs of this album. It still keeps up that good vibe. Halfway through the album is Riot Band, a much more calmer, more mellow kind of track. The vocals of Turner are slightly more artificial. The guitars are much more relaxed in a kind of way. And this is probably very intentionally ironic, since the lyrics speak about some kind of protests and a riot, and the aftermaths of it, with police gathering up to arrest these crazy drunk people and whatnot. It really does help change the mood a bit, to make things a bit more, should I say, mixes things up a bit, I will say. Red Light Indicates Doors Are Secured is a much more groovy kind of track, and it tells a somewhat humorous story about someone taking a taxi ride back home after having an old night out with partying and all that. This is one that's also very self-aware and very reminiscent of the kind of youth of like Northern England and all that. Next is Mardy Bum, and don't you just love these song titles? Mardy Bum is another somewhat more chilled out kind of track, and as probably reflects its more personal lyrics, somewhat more romantic youth subculture kind of vibes. It does pick up every now and then with that banging drum every now and then, but it still calms down just from the few previous tracks. It's another one that also helps in keeping it much calmer, I guess. Perhaps vampires are a bit stronger, but definitely picks back up the pace a bit. Its riff is much more gruffier, and the drums are very more toppling and rumbling. Its lyrics, of course, talk about vampires and stuff, and it definitely does remind me of Shaun the Dead in a way. Though I'm just like Shaun the Dead, I'm pretty sure the vampires here are kind of allegory or metaphor for something. For what, I'll probably leave to you to decide. Much like The View from the Afternoon, this too does have a kind of false ending, or it makes you think it's going to end sooner. Then there's a little shout at the end, and then it goes and continues again. It's another more fun and humorous kind of track. Next is When the Sun Goes Down, which was made into the second single of the album. It starts off very calm and slow and very chill out. It almost makes you think it's going to be that way for the whole song. Then soon after the verses are over, then it starts kicking into that usual fast kind of hard old rock sounds you come to also expect from the album and the band. Its lyrics often has delved into a somewhat taboo subject, which is probably to no surprise. It's about prostitution, specifically in the Sheffield county in England. I don't know if it's still relevant to this day, but I'm sure some people may find it relatable. From the Ritz to the Rubble is probably one of the more heavier songs of the album. Its lyrics speak about nightclub bouncers, or if not bouncers of any bar, pub, or any place. It definitely tells something of a story which has been mostly prominent in a lot of the album. It definitely paints an imagery, paints a picture of life of this old rusty town with these shady, scummy people and all that and whatnot. And the album closes off with A Certain Romance, the longest track of the album, and it definitely pays it off. Which is probably a little bit ironic, since You Probably Couldn't See for the Lights has the longest title of the album, despite being, well, the shortest song of the album. But back to A Certain Romance, it definitely, like I said, it pays off. It brings together the themes, moods, tones, stories, and characters all together, and it wraps all up in a very epic closer. It is a good send-off to the album. So, my final thoughts? What people say I am, that's what I'm not, is a very, very fun, very action-packed album. And at 14 minutes, it's worth a listen to anyone who's a big fan of independent rock music. Next time, we take a look at a much lesser known album, and one made by the band 10cc.